Hey, how's it going, everyone? Today we're going to talk a little bit about serverless by design. One of the biggest changes in our industry in the last decade or so has been moving a lot of computing over into the servers and into the cloud, and less on the server side, uh, on the actual data center side. So before all of this, things were much more complicated, and you used to have actually have people go to these big warehouses. You can think of them as BJs for computers. Like you go to these massive warehouses, and you had to manually go into these rack rooms and set up your own servers. Uh, I personally never did them, but I have a lot of OG friends who have been in the industry forever, and they would tell me these stories about going into these rooms, and they're all cages. So you have all of these cages with computers inside of them, ACs above them, and you have to set up a rack and set up all of your internet services and get everything hooked. It was a lot of work, but we don't have to do that anymore. You can easily jump onto a lot of services and be able to really benefit from using a Amazon or AWS, as well as Google or IBM. There's just so many providers out there for you to be able to just jump in and get serverless computing and take advantage of not needing to manage the servers or the underlying infrastructure. So let's talk a little bit about that. So first thing we want to talk about is why the shift to serverless, right? So for a long time, applications used to be built in just one single box, right? And these boxes housed everything that the application, the services, the any backend, the database, everything was inside of this one little box. So you had this one box was managing a whole bunch of little things inside of it. And if you ever needed to make a change, doesn't matter what the change was, you had to come back to this box and make your changes there. And so what you end up having, I'm just going to switch colors real quick. So if you ever wanted to make a change to the underlying infrastructure for your box, you had to come in here and you had to make a change to the whole thing. All right. And what was happening was, although you really wanted to change this one little piece, the whole thing had to be updated. And now we are lucky that we don't have to do this anymore. But yeah, if you want to make a change or duplicate something, what you ended up doing is having to do this whole entire migration, move this whole entire box over. So if you ever wanted to make a change and say, let's say you want to update text for something, you want to update just a simple copy, what you end up having to do is duplicate this big old box and move it somewhere else. Now, really, that became, in general, that's a really expensive process to do. Now you have these two boxes and you're kind of waiting to transition, your code over to this box. And it's just a long, difficult process, and one that I would not wish on anybody. There are a ton of applications that are still built with this in mind, but things have shifted. We no longer have, this idea of having these massive monolithic applications that you only have really one entry point into development. What we've shifted over now to is a serverless approach. And this serverless approach, or cloud-based approach, has now split things up. And so what was once your application that was this big monolithic app has now been split up and distributed, right? So now you have a client that enters in one spot, and now you have these little pieces of software. Some might be bigger than others. Don't mind this. I'm trying to do this with a tablet, and all my boxes are looking off. But it's all good, though. Uh, but yeah, so what you have is all of these little pieces now, right? So if you do want to make a change, let's say you have three different services, right? we'll say these are our services and these are our databases, right? So we'll just say DB. This will catch up. And we'll say service, right? So what you can now do is you can update service A, and B and C will keep running, right? And that's one of the powers of going serverless. You have the ability to, you know, when using together with a more distributed approach, you have the ability to now split up how you would make your updates. So if we were to come back here and try to do our update again, I'm just gonna swap colors right quick. So if we were to now update this bucket here, right? So this service gets updated, it goes down and comes back up. And taking a serverless approach and a microservice-based approach, which they work hand to hand now, but they're not the same thing, you'll be able to update this service, and these two completely run on their own, and the DB never get affected because the service doesn't need to interact. Cool? Now, like with everything, please, if you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. And if you're on the website and you're tuned in, make sure you leave. We have the chat that's up on the Easton Abelard website. So it's eastonabelard.com/developers leading in tech with hyphens in between. Definitely leave some comments if you have any questions as we're going along. All right. So when we talk about serverless and microservices, they really are two separate things. Okay. So when you talk about microservices, right? Serverless, well, let's jump into serverless first. All right. Serverless is really about not having to manage your infrastructure anymore, right? So if you have a website, right, you think about your website, you have a user, they visit your website, then that hits a couple of things, right? The first thing is going to hit is going to be your main web application, right? And that web application might then in turn be calling, a few other services, right? And all of those come back and then they go back to the user, right? And so this approach to loading in your website and getting data to the user is really great, right? We talked about how when you distribute things, you can work a lot more efficient, much faster. Well, when you're looking at pulling in a service from a microservice-based approach, you're talking about being able to split all of this down into smaller chunks that then come back to your main application. Now, when you have a serverless-based approach, what you're really doing, I'm just gonna say serverless, so we know what we're talking about. So when you do a serverless-based approach, what you're saying is, you see this app right here? Yes, I can spin up a server and have Apache, PHP, and WordPress running, right? Well, we're going to say this is a WordPress, right? We can spin that up manually, right? And then we can worry about what the CPU is, what the memory is, and then we can worry about clustering, right? Like these are all things that end up happening. So what was once this little app now becomes this, an entry point that now has, we're going to need to cluster. So we'll have, a cluster of, maybe 2 servers. And then, because we're really popular, we have to throw in another cluster, which is going to have 3 servers. And all 5 of these servers will now have to be something that you pay for. You're going to have to scale, know when to scale, how to scale. That's a lot. It's really difficult when you're trying to, especially when you're starting out and you're building an application. Imagine if each server cost, right? Because they cost money, right? Each server cost $100. If each server is going to cost you $100, we're going to keep it simple and say per day, right? So that's per day. If each server costs $100 per day, you literally just spend $500, and you don't even know if you're using all of the servers. You very well could be using just this one server, right? So only this one server is being used. However, you spun up 5 servers, so you have 4 servers that are not even aren't being used. So what does that equate to? Well, 4 servers means that you are now running at a loss. So instead of being able to use the whole $500, you're actually now wasting. Let me make that a little thinner. You are now being charged $400 extra, right? This is extra that you're being charged because you have this, server-based approach where you have to manually control everything. I've said this in the past before. We've had clients in which, something goes wrong. At any point, something goes wrong. They don't know what's going wrong, right? This server went down, this server went down, this server went down, this server went down. And now you're left with one server, and you have, let's say we'll say 1,100, right? You have 1,100 people come to the website, right? This is going to crash, completely crash. And that's the problem with running on a server-based approach. Now, when we flip to serverless, what we end up getting is we're getting a approach where now we're going to have this client, right? Wherever they come from, doesn't matter where they come from. We're not going to say, we're hands off. I don't want to know how it gets set up. Here's my app. Here's my container. I want you to use it. All right. So I'm going to talk about a few things now for our serverless setup. All right. We're still talking serverless. I'm going to make this a little smaller. So we're still talking serverless, right? So now we have our user comes to the website. With a serverless-based approach now, we're going to say that we're running a container-based application workflow, and we're going to be using AWS, right? So we once were the ones managing this, right? I'm just going to move this up. But now, when the user visits the website, what they're going to do now is we're going to fully set up a serverless setup. And if none of this makes any sense, that's cool. I will definitely be going over this later on. So, you'll have more time to kind of learn about what it is to really run a full serverless setup. So right now we're going to have something called a load balancer, right? We're using AWS, so we have Elastic Load Balancer. And this load balancer has the great fortunate job of managing all of the users coming into our website, right? But this load balancer does a lot for us. So first, our load balancer is set up with containers, right? And we're using Fargate, right? So what that means is we have an app. We no longer care about the infrastructure. We have an app that currently has 3 containers that are running, right? And we have 2 clusters. We have one on the East Coast, and then we have one on the West Coast, right? And then we don't have as much traffic, so right now there's only 2 containers spun up on the West Coast. What's really cool is when you have 2 containers running on the East Coast, 3 on the West Coast and 2 on the 3 on the East Coast and 2 on the West Coast, what you get now is anytime a user comes in, Elastic, this load balancer, will automatically say, hey, user 1, I'm sending you over to this cluster because you're on the East Coast. User 2, I'm sending you to this cluster. You're on the West Coast, right? So that's just bringing in our load balancer. Now, our infrastructure underneath here, this is serverless, right? This is running on something called ECS, okay? This is running on ECS. So combine with each other, right? And we also have Fargate, right? What you have now is you have a setup where our server itself, our user coming in is coming through a load balancer, right? All serverless. We're not managing any of this. they'll automatically be distributed to each one of these. Now, if something goes wrong, right? If for whatever reason this starts to fail, these users will automatically be brought over to this side, right? So everything is becoming fault tolerant as well, right? So if something fails, it's going to be picked up other places. Having our setup, we're still using ECS, we're using containers, right? Our application now is a node-based app and it's running completely on its own. Because we're using ECS and we're using containers, we have the ability to say, hey, if our cluster, right, which is right here, if our cluster has two servers that go down, in this case here, I want you to automatically spin up a new cluster with 4 new services, right? And this happens automatically, right? And this is the power of going serverless, right? All of this happens without us needing to work and do any more configuration. We don't have to watch it. This happens automatically, right? And something else that we may want to do is say, hey, besides doing that, I actually, look, we're getting too much traffic. I need you now to split this up. I need more than just East Coast and West Coast, right? I want this to be the West, right? The West, I want this to be, we'll go with this, the Central, right? Mid-America, right? Then we want this to be the East. But I don't want just the East. I want you to also do Florida too, because we're getting a lot of traffic there. So we want to do the Southeast, right? So these are the things that happen when you have a serverless, complete serverless infrastructure, right? Everything is orchestrated for you. You don't have to worry and plan this out. Now you do, it comes at a cost, right? You're definitely going to have to pay some money, right? But the money you're going to pay is going to look a little different, right? Serverless resources often look like this, right? It might be per minute, right? 50 cents per minute, or sometimes it's per hour. This can sometimes be per hour. And so now you're paying a price for using resources. So what happens if you aren't using any resources, right? Well, let's say all of these resources are no longer needed. It's that simple. You don't have to pay for anything, right? Your cost now goes to roughly $0, right? There might be some other things in the mix, but roughly your cost goes down to $0. Now, that is a awesome trade-off, because now you no longer, you're paying for it on some kind of interval, but you're no longer controlling the infrastructure. You're just working. You're just getting things done, right? And there are different ways. Now, I talked about a little bit about orchestration and going serverless at a container level, but you can do that outside of that too. We can also do, because we are devs, right? So let's talk a little bit about another type of serverless that we could do, and that's if we go serverless by using a function as a service. All right, we won't get too deep into this because this is definitely something that is going to need a lot more time and effort into, but these are important. I can't stress enough, these are so important that you understand these concepts, because that's what we're moving towards. Right now, full stack developers are it. If you want to maintain your current status quo, you want to maintain having the job that you're at, you're going to need to understand serverless. All right. This is something that for probably a good month and a half had a lot of people interacting and asking about serverless, right? Let's jump into a little more of the strategy. Like, what is serverless? How can I use it? And how can I benefit from setting up different, like, how do I even know I need serverless, right? And that's why I brought this together and help you understand what it is about serverless that is so important and how you can leverage it. So let's talk about functions, right? So this is another type of serverless, right? If we talk about functions, right? So before we talked about having a application, right? We talked about our application being this big old box that had all these little itty bitty services inside of there that you had to manually update the whole entire box if you ever made a change to any one of these items, right? Well, serverless functions, or functions as a service, you might see it spelled out, function as a service. What they did is introduce, do I really need a server? I don't think I need a server. I just need this one function to run. And this one function is going to call a REST API, right? That's all it's going to do. It's going to talk to the database, right? And then the database is going to return it. And then the function uses that information. And that's it. That's the communication. You don't really need a server for that, right? And so AWS has something called AWS Lambda, right? And Lambda is just that. Let's say you have a form, right, that you want to submit, right? User comes in, right? My UX while drawing is insane. So you have a form, right? You have your call to action. User submits it. Well, instead of going to our massive application that needed to be booted up, it takes about, the delay for this to be actually pushed into production is going to be 1 hour, right? Our serverless function, we're talking about seconds, right? Just pure seconds. And so what you can do is from your website, you can now submit directly to our function, right? So this is our function. So from our function, our application now goes up and then comes back down, right? This is going to be milliseconds. We're talking, this is a stretch, right? Because we're not doing anything fancy. This might be 300 milliseconds, right? And that to be honest, is still really far-fetched. This might really come out to be about 50 milliseconds, right? So we're talking about quickly throwing up something onto a function, just a function. You run your function, have the code, submit it, return a response, and that's it, right? Serverless works in so many different ways. Serverless can be at the container level that we talked about before, right? Where you have multiple containers. Nope, not this one. Where we have multiple containers. We have load balancers. We're talking full orchestration here. Load balancers. We have fault tolerance. None of this needs to be monitored by a single soul. We tell the computer, we tell the CloudWatch or whatever we're using, hey, here's our parameters. If the CPU reaches 30% usage, spin something else up, right? If we have failures that are going on for whatever reason, I want you to spin up in different regions. If we have users coming in from the West Coast, we're talking, Cali. If we have people coming in from, from Middle America, right? If we have people coming in from both the East and the Southeast, right? We want to make sure we cover everybody. We want to get our latency down, right? All that gets handled for us. We pay a minimum amount, but it all gets handled for us. All right? Then we talked a little bit about our orchestration, right? We talked about what happens if we have a server, but we only need a function, right? We just want a function to run our code, right? And so this is looking at functions. Now we can dive deeper. There are so many other pieces of functionality in here. Now, there's one more piece of serverless that I want to go into. I'm just going to look around and make sure that I have us covered with questions, because I know there's a lot of, especially with having a pretty broad topic, one that can get really complicated. I want to make sure that I cover everybody and we are all good to go. All right. Excuse me. All right, awesome. So one more piece that we're going to cover, and we're just going to talk a little bit about web pages and websites, right? So another way you can use serverless is actually our web page is only serving static HTML, right? Just pure HTML. and a little bit of JavaScript, right? Nothing fancy. Everything is there, right? What we can do now is, instead of having the server, because we're talking serverless, right? Instead of the user now coming in from up here and going directly to a server or anything in between, we want to just give them static content, right? So we can actually host this static content on AWS S3, right? So from AWS S3, what we have is the ability to now host it directly to our user, right? So we don't need a server anymore. And this is, but if I say pennies, I really mean it. Like, you can literally, from a server that might cost you $30 a month, right? Depending on your setup, of course. Running with an S3, we can even throw, because you don't really want them to access S3 directly, you still want to have some kind of balance in front of it, right? We want to use a CDN, something called a CDN, right? So instead of the user coming directly to us, we're going to throw in that CDN in between them. Right? So the user comes to the CDN, and this CDN works across the globe. So let's make this, get rid of our box, because it really, a CDN is more than that. A CDN really works across the globe, right? We're going to throw some stuff up. Right? So it works across the globe. And so when the user comes in, if the user is here in, let's say, Canada, yeah, I know. I know. So let's say the user's in Canada, we're going to get, the CDN is actually going to deliver our content over here closer to them, right? In Canada, because they're up in Canada. And, we don't want to give somebody who's up in Canada a server that's over here, up in China. Like, that doesn't make any sense. So the CDN actually helps us by doing that. So if you throw a CDN in front of our S3 bucket, now what will happen is they come to the CDN, it caches it closer to them, right? So now you're going to have a cache. And this cache will now double down and get the content to the user even faster. All right? This is the power of working with serverless, right? Straight across the board. You're going to see more and more content. You're going to see faster content, faster load speeds. You're going to see less of a maintenance on you, the developer, right? You're no longer going to need a team of 20, 30, 40 people to just manage the content, making sure it gets to the user. You're just going to focus on the things that matter the most, all right? With that said, this is something that we've been working on. We've shifted gear because there's just been so many people asking about what skill set can we use right now in the current economy, and with everything that's going on. How do you secure your job? How do you find a way to solidify yourself, right? And it's going to be by learning serverless. It's going to be learning about designing, architecting, and having a better understanding about the infrastructure around the code you create. The code that you create, the code that you put out there, has more to do with just this one piece of information, right? If you're just doing CSS and JavaScript, right? This is the only piece that you're doing, right? Your one job. This is going to be one job that can be done by, at this point, let's say 100 million people can do this job, right? We're stretching, but this is, this is where we're getting to, where so many people are developers now. And people who aren't developers are able to still do this, right? They're just coming in and learning the material, which is awesome, right? We want more people in the community. But the barrier to get in is getting a lot smaller. You feel me? So what we want to do is help you get away from this position where you're kind of thinking, hey, am I going to lose my job, right? Because now this one job I was doing is easily done by so many other people. So what we're working on right now is actually getting you a workshop. It'll be a single day workshop where we're going to dive deep into really setting up a serverless infrastructure, what does it look like, how to set it up, and use AWS to create a fully functional application completely using serverless technology, all serverless technology. The goal is this application for you to run per month. We want to get your number down to about $10. All right? If we're generous, we'll say $9.99. Okay? We want you to be able to run the application at a maximum of $9 a month. Now, let's say you're building out a serverless application, but you want to deep down inside, you want to build this, right? You want to move over to not just developing things for your job, but you want to move into a new zone, right? You want to be able to make a software as a service. And you want to be able to create an application of your own, right? And then be able to, of course, turn that into dollars, right? Combining the serverless with a SaaS product, you'll be able to make money and keep your expenses low, right? And we're not talking, an expense column of having to do $100,000, dollars in order just to get started. No. We're not talking about that. We're talking about realistically coming in at just you developing it, or if you have a team, right? So we want to do the cost for the team, whatever that might be. We want to keep the cost for the serverless infrastructure down to about $10, right? That's the goal, $10. Now, what do you think that will cost you in time and effort to be able to build out an application and learn what it takes to build out an application that will free you from this? Because right now there's a lot of stress, which, is completely understandable. A lot of our clients are going through this now where, we have a few of our clients, not just one, but a few of them, 75% of their workforce was dropped. 75%. I'm going to write that down, right? Backwards. 75% were laid off, right? Unfortunately, because of the current circumstances. What would it be for you? What kind of change would it be if this happened to you, but you had this running? And this is what you were making, right? You were still making money. What kind of difference would that make for you in your career and your just working ability and your family structure, your family stability, when you're not worried about, oh man, we got laid off, when you can still use your skill sets to do something else at a fraction, absolute fraction of the cost? Well, what we have now is something that we've been working on. We've switched gears a little bit and have put together a one-day virtual workshop where you and a small group, it's not going to be a big group. We want to keep this something that we can really spend some one-on-one time in the group setting and get you running, up and running, building software using your current skills. Well, what we're going to do is in the comment below, we're going to have a link to the workshop page where you can sign up and learn more about it. We're going to run the workshop in 10 days. We're going to have this workshop running. So we're going to have the workshop, make sure that you get all the information so that in 10 days that you can join us for the workshop. Everything's going to be online and you'll be able to save your seat and get access to the information that you need to become a full-fledged SaaS developer. Learn the serverless skills and be able to put up an application and keep your cost as low as possible. All right? So I'm really excited to be able to bring this to you. Tomorrow, you'll be able to access the page. You'll have access to our, what's going on. You'll have access to, how you can join the workshop. And more importantly, you'll learn the skills that you need to be able to get outside of everything that you're seeing now. Get outside of, the fear of losing your job and not having anything else to fall back on, or if you've already lost your job, I'm sorry to hear that. Let's get to it. Let's do something else, right? If, while you're looking and while things, because, let's be honest, you'll be able to find some stuff online, but it's still going to be a hard sell right now. But while you have the mental capacity, let's do something about it. Let's get outside of the current environment, the current industry, the current economic struggles that are either happening or about to happen. Let's get out of there. Let's talk about how you can use your current knowledge base to make something big and something that you and your family can live off of. All right? So check the link in the description below. Check out edisonabler.com. You're going to see all the information you need to know about this serverless workshop that we will be kicking off in 10 days. All right? 10 days from now, we're going to be jumping in, and it's going to be live. We're going to be running it all online, so you don't have to worry about going anywhere, which nobody really is, or nobody really should be going anywhere. Excuse me. So we're going to be running this on April 4th. All right? You're going to hear me say that over the next 10 days on April 4th. April 4th. All right? On April 4th, we're going to be running this workshop. So be sure to check out edisonabler.com for all the details about this serverless workshop. And we're going to talk about and teach you everything that you need to know, right, to get started building out serverless applications. All right? We've had a couple of questions that popped in, so I'm just going to answer these right quick for us. All right, so the first thing that we want to talk about is why is serverless so important, right? Well, serverless and microservices, they're very important because when you look at infrastructure, when you look at building any type of product, your team is a resource. Money is a resource, right? When you build serverless applications, you bring down the cost. Okay? I'm not joking. $10, $30, $40. I mean, everything we add will just add a little bit more complexity, but I'm going to show you how you can keep this cost extremely low and still have a database running, still have access to a CDN, right? A content delivery network. You're still going to have access to lightning speed, downloads for your application or your website. You're still going to have access to building out a authentication layer and analytics. So we're talking like literally, let's talk about what we're talking. We're talking about building out something that is as low cost as possible to start. And as you make more money, right? And as you have more traffic, the price will go up. But you know what? Your revenue will go up faster than the cost of your infrastructure, right? When done correctly, your revenue will go up higher and faster than your infrastructure. You know what else happens? When nobody visits, this goes down, right? So your actual cost goes down when no one visits. So it's not like you're going up. And that's the power of serverless. Now, there are other things, including latencies and being able to go hands off, right? You don't want to be constantly monitoring a server. I've done that for a long time. It's painful, right? You know what I get? See, this is clock, right? That seems to always go off at 2 a.m. Right? At 2 a.m. is when the call goes out. My server crashed. You don't want that call. Trust me, I've done that for many years, right? You get that text message, it's like, oh, man. All right, cool, man. Give me like 20 minutes to wake up. Just give me 20 minutes. All right, so we're going to shift our gear. We're going to teach you how to level up your skills, learn how to build, start the process of learning and understanding what it is to build a serverless application and how we can get a serverless application up and running, full CDN authentication, all up and running really quick. That is what we're going to be focusing on, right? use your skills, the skill sets that you have right now, and let's make a difference. Let's get into the mode of building our own wealth and building our own knowledge and using that knowledge that you already use on a regular basis and just upping it up just a little bit to allow you to then leverage it to make some money. All right. So once again, visit easenabler.com/serverless workshop and let's make this happen. All right. Ian Abelard. If you have any more questions, please, drop a line and look out for more information on how we're going to build this serverless to SaaS product. All right.